Transfer flops number 1. Joe from CSKA Moscow to Manchester City. Even before the Abu Dhabi era, Manchester City tried to make a transfer statement of a big-name Brazilian superstar signing. The blue half of Manchester was owned by Thaksin Shinawatra at the time, who was on the run from the law, and the club had just made a £33 million loss. This had forced the club to take out huge loans and mortgage their next season's Premier League TV payments to Standard Bank. The club did not even have the money to pay wages and were close to insolvency, but still they went out and broke their transfer record to bring in João Alves de Assis Silva from CSKA. Joe had starred as a youngster with Corinthians before CSKA Moscow snapped him up to play alongside Wagner Love in 2005. Over the next couple of years, he established himself as their top striker, scoring 30 goals in his final season for CSKA, though he was only 21. However, despite the goals, Joe was desperate to leave Russia due to a number of racist instruments. He said, "Once we had lunch at McDonald's and coffee was thrown at us by a Russian who does not like blacks. On the streets, locals make the sign of a cross at us. Now we have to eat out discreetly." In 2008, on the same day that Newcastle United signed Jonas Gutierrez, Manchester City completed the £19 million signing of new club record transfer Joe, beating Valencia to the Brazilian signature. He was Mark Hughes' first signing for City and beat the previous record of £13 million spent on Nicolas Anelka back in 2002. The deal had been extremely difficult to complete due to Kia Joorabchian's part ownership of the Brazilian, as the rules in the English League had recently changed and no longer allowed players to have third-party ownership. Joe signed a 4-year deal, and Hughes said of him, "He's a big talent and a young man with a big future. A lot has been said about him and there was a big expectation on him coming out of Brazil. So with the success he's had, I think it's a real coup that we've been able to bring him to the club. He's a big guy in stature and in ability, so I think everybody will enjoy watching him play." However, there had already been signs of problems, as his one Brazil cap in a friendly versus Turkey the previous year was his last for a while after a falling out with national manager Dunga. Joe had been part of the Brazil under-23 team that won a bronze at the 2008 Olympics, despite the problems with Dunga at full level. However, it is still a worrying sign that no one heeded because of his goals. The English leagues were a shock to him. Joe later admitted that both he and Robinho, who joined the club that season as well, was surprised by the sheer physical size of Premier League players. Joe said in an interview recently, "Then Robinho said, 'Joe, what the hell are we going to play football or rugby? Look at the size of these guys.' I laughed and said, 'Robinho, welcome to the Premier League,' and it gets worse." He was terrified before the match, but everything ended up really well. We played fine and won 6-0. Robinho had a great start, scoring a goal and giving 3 assists. I also managed to score my first goal for City. Thank God we were playing football. If we played rugby against those Portsmouth guys, we were screwed." That first season was a real struggle for Joe to even break into the City team, and he featured just 6 times in the first half of the season. Hughes was clearly not impressed, and in January 2009 he signed Craig Bellamy to replace him, and Joe moved to Everton on loan on transfer deadline day, the 2nd of February that year. City continued to pay his wages. Everton were in desperate need of a forward as Yakubu, James Vaughan and Louis Sahard all suffered long-term injuries. Joe did enough for the Toffees in his 12 appearances, scoring 5 goals, to convince David Moyes to bring him back in the summer. A deal was agreed to take him on a loan with an option to buy deal for the 2009-10 season, but Joe himself admitted he let himself down. There was an episode at Everton when I'd hurt my ankle and I asked David Moyes if I could come back to Brazil to speed up treatment. I came back here and didn't have any treatment. I did other things. I told him I was fit to face Chelsea. I played from the start in London and I didn't play well at all. I was in pain and I hid it from him, and he found out, and he was very angry. I had opportunities but I wasn't focused. I didn't take care of myself off the field. I didn't rest. I didn't train properly. It was immaturity. He finally signed his ticket out of Everton when he returned to Brazil over Christmas without permission, and Joe returned to City with his tail between his legs. The problem was that he was still unwanted in Manchester, and so a deal was agreed on the same day to loan him to Galatasaray for the rest of the season. Once again, he did not do enough to earn a permanent move and returned to Manchester at the end of the season. With little interest in his services from elsewhere, He was given one last chance in the Man City team, but managed just 3 goals in 23 appearances, 2 of them coming against Cypriot side Nicosia Omnicia in the UEFA Cup. At the end of the season, he was offloaded to Internacional, back home in Brazil, but a year later in 2012 he moved on again to another Brazilian side, Atlético Mineiro. He had managed to restore his place in the Brazilian national team, but indiscipline off the pitch ended his international career in 2014 with just 20 caps and 5 goals. It also saw Mineiro release him in November of that year due to his constant disciplinary issues, but they reinstated him a couple of months later in January 2015 as manager Livia Culpe tried to give him another chance. Joe's time at Mineiro came to an end soon after as the club missed salary payment dates and he moved to Dubai club Al Shabab on a 3-year contract in 2015. Once again he did not last long, and in 2016 he moved to Chinese side Jiangsu Suning and then back to Brazil with Corinthians in 2017. However, he was a changed man by now. After admitting to alcoholism, he would not even take a cup of beer offered to him during on-pitch celebrations after Joe helped clinch the league title for the club. Since then, he has moved to Japan to play for Nagoya Grampus in 2018, where he finally seems to have settled down. Nowadays, Joe is more likely to be in the media discussing his past mistakes rather than due to current issues, often being asked about his time at City and why it all went wrong. Saying once, "At CSKA, I played as a second striker, always changing position with my mate Wagner Love. But in the Premier League, I was the centre forward. In England, you've got to have a lot of strength because of contact between the players all the time. I evolved a lot in England, tactically and physically, because the league there is very demanding in every way. Everything was new for me in England. I arrived in Manchester City as the club's most expensive signing ever. After me came Robinho, Shaun Wright-Phillips, and the team started improving. But my adaptation process to the Premier League was tough. I'd come from the Russian Premier League, where CSKA was by far the most powerful team, and now I had to score goals in the world's best tournament against the world's best defenders. The problem is that, whatever the reasons for it, Joe was so bad for City that their fans have a chant for him when he plays against them which goes, "You've got Joe, ha ha ha, you've got Joe, ha ha ha," and that is what he will be remembered for when his career is over.